not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts on a bridge to history. What body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out.
Friday Java on the 4th of August, 2018, from WBRN Radio and over the Boston Red Network and various other outlets, iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, Blog Talk. It's still around. YouTube, Google, Alexa, and the Google app that is very similar to Alexa, I should say, a smart speaker, and various others as we roll along here on this day. We'll hear from our people, our friends, I should say, at the University of Virginia. That is Larry Sabato's shop, Dr. Sabato and his crystal ball. We also pay homage to Heather Heyer, who was brutally murdered in Charlottesville, Virginia, by white supremacists. Nonetheless, we'll start this off with an article from the Washington Post, sometime known as the Amazon Post, whatever. This is the investigation involving the Clinton White House and Vince Foster's death. The actor here was Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh, a party hack, no doubt about it, was a rising star in 1995 in the Republican Party. He had clerked at the Supreme Court, and he joined the investigation of one Kenneth Starr. Period. And the investigation there went from Clinton and Hillary Clinton at the time to the death of Vince Foster. Vince Foster was a childhood friend of Bill Clinton's, later a partner in the Rose law firm. That was where Hillary Clinton worked in Little Rock, Arkansas. And he argued, not supported allegation. It was one of those things that Foster may have been murdered. They conducted a probe, a very long probe, a 4-page memo obtained by the Washington Post from the Library of Congress sheds light on how Kavanaugh's thinking evolved on the legal rights of a sitting president. Now, at that time, Kavanaugh was the opinion that a sitting president could be investigated, as Starr's office did, wasted millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and came up with nothing. Now, it was also involving Monica Lewinsky there. If they were doing a similar situation with DJ Trump, it would cost $1 billion because they would have so many Monica Lewinsky types to investigate. Kavanaugh reported in October of 1997, affirmed earlier findings. There were various findings of various operators here that Foster committed suicide. It cost $2 million, lasted 3 years. That was on the cheap, but again, that was over 20 years ago, period. Foster's family expressed outrage at Starr's investigation enabled conspiracy theories. This was the time that we had just seen a few years earlier, the case of the People versus Orenthal James Simpson in California. This invigorated the right, built the right, it built CNN, no doubt about that, and an earlier network that was not in infancy, but was just beginning, the Fox News Channel. This got the right-wingers started, and Crying Freddie went around the country crying, and this played to a right-wing audience for such things as the death penalty, so-called jury reform, etc., echoed across the country. And at this backdrop, Bill Clinton was in the White House, and Bill Clinton himself did not favor the verdict that the L.A. jury brought forward in O.J.'s case. But later, Bill Clinton himself, in a deposition, would be forced, to present pictures of his private parts as part of the lawsuit brought by Paula Jones. But this investigation went on, period, and Kavanaugh told CNN in 1999 appearance that Starr's office probed a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of controversy. He took time and made efforts to turn over every stone. How many stones he turned over is debated to find, quote-unquote, the truth. He declined, of course, to talk for this story to the Post. He's forgotten about that. He felt strongly that his office had responsibility to resolve the Foster matter one way, once and for all. That's what Starr said. The office was under intense pressure by conservative writers and members of Congress who wanted an independent body to explore the murder possibility. There was also debate within Starr's team about the apparent oversight in prior investigations. We cannot have, especially since I'm charged with this investigation, an unsettled set of conspiracy theories that go unaddressed, Starr said. I viewed it as a matter of accountability and also good for the country. Well, whether or not it was good for the country or not, the headline was Starr investigates Foster murder sold newspapers. And the whole idea of Vince Foster going to this Fort Mercy park in Maryland, evidently one day, a routine day, he left the White House, drove to the park that was in Fairfax County, Virginia, Maryland. Wait a minute. Well, anyway, I think it's Maryland, or maybe Virginia. Anyway, neatly folding his coat on the passenger side of his family's Honda. He didn't buy an American car. In that day, it was a big topic. Today, it would be nothing. He walked to a spot near historic Cannon, put the barrel of a .38 caliber revolver in his mouth, and pulled the trigger. That's according to multiple investigations. I think there's not doubt that the .38 revolver ended up in his mouth. But it sparked intrigue. He left no suicide note. The day after his death, a White House official found a torn up pieces of paper in which Foster listed things that were troubling him. Here, running people is considered a sport, he wrote. The park police were blocked from when they went to the White House to retrieve the papers. One of the events that later spurred calls for an independent counsel. Law enforcement authorities soon concluded that Foster died by his own hands. To them, the evidence was clear. He was depressed. He held an old revolver in his hand, and it was covered with gunshot residue. That is not disputed. The FBI, park police jointly announced their conclusion that the death was a suicide. Conservative talk show hosts and other online activists branded the finding a sham. The theory surfaced that Foster knew too much about the Clintons' financial affairs, including a land deal in Arkansas called Whitewater. Well, that was also investigated. Janet Reno had people investigating it. It was investigated all over the airwaves. Mark Turney, a prominent Washington lawyer who served as a deputy to Starr, said Kavanaugh had all the right credentials and showed great promise, though he had much to learn about conducting an investigation. Brett was, from the very beginning, somebody I could rely upon, and we could rely upon to dig. Well, he didn't have any credentials for digging. Turnkey and later Starr Deputy John Bates, now U.S. District Judge, both said Kavanaugh worked exhaustively. Well, no doubt he did, but for no purpose. The office was under pressure from the Clinton White House and its allies to stop the investigation, but Clinton never held a press conference 1,000 times and said that it should be done. Kavanaugh's memo to Starr and others offered a detailed reasoning for a fresh examination of Foster death. Among the recipients was Sam Dash. You remember him from Watergate fame there. He was a counsel to the Watergate Committee. The Post located Kavanaugh's memo in Dash's papers. Kavanaugh argued that while Starr's appointment did not mention Foster, we had received allegations that Foster's death was related to the President and Mrs. Clinton. He cited two theories: the allegation that Foster was murdered or killed himself because he knew too much about, the Clintons' finances. The Kavanaugh memo said that claims justified continuing an investigation to determine. This is where the party hack part came in. Kavanaugh immersed himself in Foster's final days. He viewed photos and went around basically places. Amongst those present in Starr's office was somebody named Christopher Ruddy, a journalist who wrote for conservative publications. Ruddy argued Starr to label Foster's examination a homicide investigation. In the fall of 1977, Ruddy claimed to cover up in his book the strange death of Vince Foster. He criticized almost everyone, including Starr's office, claiming it never resolved the case. Well, the park police, the FBI, etc., and for instance, Starr, this is a tiny square of land, may yet become a symbol of a cover-up conducted by people who have, and with the help of the press, placed themselves above the law. So Reddy said. Reddy is now the CEO of Newsmax and an informal advisor to DJ Trump. Well, these people were all party hacks from the very beginning. They will remain party hacks. Kavanaugh resigned from Starr's office, joined the Kirkland Ellis law firm, but at Starr's request, he returned there and to support an effort at the Supreme Court to obtain notes that Foster's lawyer made in conversation with him days before Foster's death. It was the only appearance before the Supreme Court by Kavanaugh. He argued the attorney-client privilege disappears after Foster's death. The court disagreed 6-3 against Kavanaugh and Starr. So in other words, Kavanaugh lost his only appearance before the Supreme Court. He served in George H.W. Bush's administration. Kavanaugh was nominated by President Bush for a seat on the. I'm sorry, that was G.W. Bush. For a seat on the Court of Appeals, called the Second Supreme Court. He was asked by Senator Feinstein to reflect on the Starr investigation. He testified that in retrospect it was probably a mistake for Starr to take an additional line of inquiry. That was highlighting problems that D.J. Trump now has. His original mandate was a Whitewater land deal and a small Arkansas savings and loan that went belly up. Kavanaugh went further in a 2009 article in the Minnesota Law Review. He said that Starr operated under a badly flawed law, particularly to the extent to which it allowed civil suits against presidents to proceed while the president is in office. Kavanaugh, who served as Bush's associate counsel and staff secretary, that's a position that many have and served, and D.J. Trump's staff secretary was, of course, forced to resign. He came to believe that presidents are too busy to deal with civil suits and criminal investigations, suggesting the matter be deferred until they leave office. He stressed that a benevolent president could still be impeached. Well, no doubt about that. But the right to sue a president, as the right to sue anyone else, is up to the courts. Kavanaugh was proud of his work. What was important in these investigations, however, is that the American people, at the end of the day, had confidence that the person was dogged at getting at, quote-unquote, the truth. Be very, very skeptical of that argument anytime a person makes it. But the person really went after it hard, and what Judge Starr did in his investigation, he said on CNN. Starr said he ultimately has the ultimate responsibility for the length of the investigation. That point has landed on my foot, not at Brett Kavanaugh. So he's apologizing for Kavanaugh's shortcomings, and which were many. Let me go to another story here. A sportscaster named Dale Hansen, a fat European guy in a deep red state, is an unlikely liberal hero. Nonetheless, he's another. It's another shooting in America, he said, almost casually, after the 2016 ambush that killed 5 police officers in downtown Dallas. This is what I have become. I'm not talking about a side tonight, although I know you think I am, he said, discussing the March for Life rally it was in the spring after a massacre at South Florida High School. I'm just hoping the kids from Parkland High don't lose the passion they have now. Hansen, who's part of WFAA's nightly news in Dallas-Fort Worth, had explained Michael Sam's plan in the social fabric of the NFL. He chastised high school baseball fans who held white power signs. His finger wagged Trump and the NFL franchise owners who wanted to halt football players demonstrating during the national anthem. My best friend in high school was killed in Vietnam. Carol Miser would be 18 years older forever. Hansen went virtual again this week with a biting commentary on the Dallas Cowboy owners. Jerry Jones suggested that the team would employ a hardline national anthem policy mandating players stand toes on the line during the Star Spangled Banner. The NFL committees are investigating, are negotiating of that fact. Jones loves the national anthem so much. When it was being played before the start of practice Saturday, he left his cap on. When he was told about the mistake that he was making, he still left the cap on. he who makes rules apparently doesn't have to follow them. In an interview this week, Hansen talked about going unplugged and how a sportscaster in Texas finds times and authority to share progressive messages with viewership and might not want to listen to. Questions and answers have been, how do we wear both hats, giving people regular sports news and then also reading your opinion pieces? You pick up the paper, and for those of us who like sports, you go to the sports section, and what the first thing you need to read the columns. People ask me, are you a reporter or a columnist? And I say, yes, I am. I encompass, as every sportscaster does, the rules of a columnist and a newspaper reporter: opinion and straightforward information. How do you start writing your unplugged column? I started writing it in 1982. Thanks God for kids, and I do at Christmas time every year. It's a song of the Oak Ridge Boys. We put the video back, and and I started writing little pieces, usually about a child who was killed or a family who lost a son. And let me hit. Tell me about one segment that stood out for you. The Michael Sam, the commentary. Sam's the defensive back. We covered that story also here at WBRN. From Missouri, who in 2013 Southwest Conference Defensive Player of the Year, announced he was gay before the 2014 NFL Draft, and was predicted to be a 3rd to 5th round of selection before the announcement. He was selected by the St. Louis Rams, who are no longer there, in the 7th round, then cut in the preseason. I read it to a friend of mine. Yep, I think it's okay. I like it. Okay, I am thinking it's a little bit better than okay, and read it to another liberal friend of mine. And they're sitting there having a cigar and a glass of wine with two buddies of mine. One of them is an incredibly liberal guy. The other one is so-so. Both of them just looked at me and said, yep, that should work. So I got on the air and promised thinking about it was fine. Let me just play a little bit of Mr. Hansen here and his commentary on Michael Sam. Just listen to it.
If counting is one of your daily tasks, we can automate the process.
It was quite a weekend. That little dust up in Lubbock Saturday night. And then yesterday, Missouri's All-American defensive end Michael Sam, the SEC's Defensive Player of the Year and expected to be a 3rd to 5th round pick in the NFL Draft, tells the world he's gay. The best defensive player in college football's best conference, only a 3rd to 5th round NFL pick? Really? That is shocking. And I guess that other thing is too. Michael Sam would be the first openly gay player in the NFL, says he knows there will be problems and they've already started. Several NFL officials telling Sports Illustrated it will hurt him on draft day because a gay player wouldn't be welcome in an NFL locker room. It would be uncomfortable because that's a man's world. You beat a woman and drag her down a flight of stairs, pulling her hair out by the roots, you're the 4th guy taken in the NFL Draft. You kill people while driving drunk, that guy's welcome. Players caught in hotel rooms with illegal drugs and prostitutes, we know they're welcome. Players accused of rape and pay the woman to go away. You lie to police trying to cover up a murder, we're comfortable with that. You love another man, well, now you've gone too far. It wasn't that long ago when we were being told that black players couldn't play in our games because it would be uncomfortable. And even when they finally could, it took several more years before a black man played quarterback because we weren't comfortable with that either. So many of the same people who used to make that argument, and the many who still do, are the same people who say government should stay out of our lives, but then want government in our bedrooms. I've never understood how they feel comfortable laying claim to both sides of that argument. I'm not always comfortable when a man tells me he's gay. I don't understand his world, but I do understand that he's part of mine. Civil rights activist Audre Lorde said, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." We've always been able to recognize them. Some of us accept them. And I want to believe that there will be a day when we do celebrate them. I don't know if that day's here yet. I guess we're about to find out. But when I listen to Michael Sam, I do think it's time to celebrate him now.
That was Mr. Hansen there. And a sportscaster, we got Mike down here, in the very red state of Texas. Reminds me of my broadcast partner, the late Jerry Pippin, out of Oklahoma, that said things that a lot of his fellow citizens did not agree with, but yet he remained on the, as one would say, the tip of the air there, and was beloved by many. Let's say goodbye to an old symbol, Ron Dellums, and get it from several sources here. But Ron Dellums, of course, was a congressperson from Oakland for 27 years, died at 82. One of many, this is from the Boston Globe. Ron Dellums, the son of a longshoreman who became one of the U.S. best-known African-American congressmen, a California Democrat with a left-wing agenda, put civil rights and programs for people ahead of weapon systems and warfare. Died at his home in Washington, D.C. A former social worker, he represented Oakland and Berkeley, and went to D.C. in 1971. Remember him? I was working with George McGovern at the time. Nonetheless, he demanded a House investigation into U.S. war crimes in Vietnam. When his pleas were ignored, he held his own informal hearing, drew national attention. In anti-war protests raged outside the Capitol. A former Army sergeant told in unsworn testimony how he and his platoon had massacred 30 people and women and children in a Vietnam village. It was shocking. But over the next 27 years, Ron Dellums would become a calmer voice, still defending the principles as he saw them. He was spearheaded the Congressional Black Caucus and conferring with the White House, the Pentagon, and leaders of Congress as a member and a full chair of the House Armed Services, finally the Armed Services Committee. By then, a lawmaker who had cut a striking figure on joining the House of Representatives. He was a 6'4", had an afro, tie and Edwardian jackets, bell-bottom trousers, were in a three-piece suit. He won dozens of re-elections and sometimes gauged the respect of colleagues on both sides of the aisle. His voting record was almost virtually straight A from labor, consumer groups, women's groups, environmental groups, civil rights organizations, etc. Restricted aid to countries like Zaire, Liberia, and Sudan, whose regimes were openly repressive. After a 14-year campaign against apartheid in South Africa, that he'll be remembered most for there. He wrote the 1986 legislation that mandated a trade embargo and divestment by U.S. companies and citizens' holdings in South Africa. Reagan vetoed it. That showed you where Reagan stood, and was overridden by Congress. 20th century first in foreign policy. The sanction was lifted in 1991 when the apartheid regime ended in South Africa. Mr. Dellums opposed every major military intervention on his tenure except emergency relief in Somalia in 1992. He sued George H.W. Bush, unsuccessfully, to stop the Persian Gulf War that was in 1990 and 1991, saying the invasion did not have congressional authority. He voted against new weapons programs and military budgets of all 6 presidents in his era. His alternative budget, written for the Black Caucus, proposed spending instead on education, jobs, housing, health care, assistance for the poor, and programs to fight drug abuse. Right-wing critics labeled him a communist, citing his 1970 talk to the World Peace Conference in Stockholm, and he's meeting with the late Fidel Castro in 1977. If being an advocate for peace, justice, and humanity towards all humans is radical, then I guess I can be called radical, he told the Washington Post, and a radical opposed to the use of 70% of federal monies for destruction and war. Then I'm a radical. Over time, colleagues are keen to respect Mr. Dellums. In 1993, House Democratic Caucus voted 198 to name him chair of the Armed Services Committee with oversight over defense appropriations. He was the first African American and the first anti-war activist to hold that position. I disagree with him utterly and completely. That is Topeka Spring, a military analyst from the conservative Heritage Foundation, told USA Today. But he was upfrontly open and honest and not the least vindictive about the way he pursued his legislative agenda. During his 2 years as the chair, Dellums conferred with President Clinton, Defense Secretary Les Aspin, late Les Aspin. With the Cold War over, he achieved cutbacks in some weapon systems, notably the B-52 Spirit, that's a stealth bomber. He failed to make substantive progress in redirecting budget priorities. In the 1960s, Dellums worked for the state and private social work agencies in the Bay Area, aiding poor and troubled clients. In 1972, he's backed by a coalition of people of color, students, and labor. He upset Representative Jeffrey Colon, a more conventional liberal. Dellums became a lobbyist after he left Congress, starting his own firm and representing clients in transportation, pharmaceuticals, and health insurance. He lived in D.C. until 2006, when last hurrah he became the mayor of Oakland. Served one term from 2007 to 2011. He hired more police officers to fight crime. That was a mistake. Added teachers and new programs to cut truancy and dropout rates in troubled public schools. So that was Ron Dellums. Was listed here. This is the Philadelphia Tribune. A fiery former congressman died at 82. I believe the one that we just read was out of the Bay. Oh, that was out of the Boston Globe. We had one also out of the Bay Area there where he ran, and Ron Dellums, dead at 82 years old. A momentous, I should say, a moment for progressives in America. He was a member also of the Democratic Socialists. Let me get to Larry Sabato here. And the crystal ball, Senate observations, placing the 2018 election in the context of the upper chamber election of 1913. These are key takeaways from 1914 to 2016. Presidential cycles featured higher rates of straight ticket outcomes than medium elections, with 74% of presidential Senate results going for the same party in presidential years. Midterm election cycles show more splitting. This has been a big debate here, with 61% of presidential Senate results won by the same party in 21 of 25 midterm cycles that follows the presidential election in the 1913 to 2016 period. The share of split ticket presidential Senate results increased compared to the share in previous presidential cycles. In 2018, the Democratic caucus is defending 26 of 36 Senate seats, that's 72%, and will contest this cycle the most of any party in after World War II. The figure includes the Alabama special election seat. That's what Mr. Jones won there. Democrats are defending more seats than a non-presidential party in previous midterm elections. Of those seats, just over half, 14, are in states that lean towards the Democratic Party that was in the 2016 election, while 12 are in states that lean towards the GOP, including 10 that Trump carried. Now, there are exceptions to this, and we have noted that in the past, but let me just finish this up. Controversially, the 2018 Republicans are tied with the 1970 Republicans for the fewest seats a presidential party has had to defend, 10 in the midterm election. It includes, of course, the Alabama race. It's a different year. In the 39 open seats contest in seats previously held by the presidential party, where partisan leans favor the non-presidential party, the presidential party has won just 9 times, 29%. The winning percentage of the president's party in open seats that lean towards it is better at 69%, but still far beyond the flip of the coin. Presidential party Senate incumbents in states that lean a bit away from their party Heller in Nevada, non-presidential candidates have split their attempts to retain seats that just lean against them, though they have won most of the few open seat contests in states where the partisan baseline was even worse from the non-presidential party. Unstoppable forces and immovable objects. The crystal ball has noted repeatedly since early 2017 that the Senate elections in 2018 cycle feature two contrasting forces, highly polarized partisan voting in elections running up against a tendency from non-presidential party incumbents to do well in midterms, even in states that have backed the other party in most recent presidential elections, with 10 Democratic Senate incumbents running for re-election in states that DJ Trump carried. The force that proves them to be more unstoppable or immovable will hypothetically were aligned their state Senate seats with the 2016 election winner. This fall, Democrats won 10 seats they currently hold, while Republicans won just 1. Kind of an interesting contrast here. We know that such an outcome is highly unlikely at this point, while Republicans are favored to retain control of the chamber, that is the Senate. Democrats do have a chance of winning seats in Trump-won states, while also adding 1 or 2 other states that the president carried, Arizona and Tennessee. That race in Tennessee, Blaisdell against Blackburn. Blackburn's a right-wing kook. How that will go. Breasden, I'm sorry, mispronounced his name. He's a former governor, well-liked in Tennessee. Whether they can link him up with Hillary Clinton and whomever else, Nancy Pelosi, is to be seen. The last Democrat to win a Senate seat was Albert Gore. And Tennessee has changed, and some say Tennessee is more conservative now than in 2016. That's still to be seen. The 2016 cycle was highly partisan, no doubt about that. But you have to include in that voter suppression, mass voter suppression in places like Ohio, under Scott in Florida, in Pennsylvania under the Republican legislative regime, in Michigan under Boss Snyder, or Gateway Snyder, in Wisconsin under Boss Walker. And not only that, malpractice by Hillary the Monster Clinton played in there is the second one. And thirdly, abuse of Bernie Sanders in the primary by the monster and the Democratic National Committee left a bad taste in many of our mouths, and we voted green. So therefore, there were a lot of people that skipped it, as they say. We won't continue on this part. Parties on the defensive in midterm elections, of course, Senate elections are not truly national elections. That's true. That goes back to the maximum of Thomas P. Tip O'Neill, who represented a district in Boston. The House is up all 435 seats. Anyway, they're all up for election, whereas in the Senate it's a little bit different. The presidential lean and party exposure in midterms, as discussed, the 2070 cycle, and president lean, we can apply that frame of analysis for all midterms. That is investigating how many seats the party has to defend that were on favorable or unfavorable term based on previous presidential elections. After all, a landslide presidential contest, there has often been many split ticket results because the voters backed the presidential winner all over the country, but may have supported the other party's candidate in the Senate. There's no doubt about that. The idea of throw the rascals out. Different type of voting, particularly in states like, say, Wisconsin, for instance, that has a bad taste on DJ Trump. And you haven't seen DJ Trump around. He has been spending some time in Pennsylvania. He's been in Tennessee. He's been in Florida speaking to his base. That tells us here at the Ouija board, as opposed to the crystal ball, that he's trying to keep, as they say, the troops in line. Period. Now, a final thought here on some of these elections. Now, you go back to 1970. There are always questions of who is voting. The demographics obviously have changed since 1970 tremendously. So let's get to the conclusion here. Historic midterm election results suggest that they are for a bounce back year of a split ticket outcomes in the Senate elections as they relate to previous presidential elections. This is good news for Democrats because they are defending one of the largest number of seats, no doubt about that. What has changed here in 1970, George McGovern was a senator from South Dakota, who has had Republicans basically, I believe, the last 20 years. So that state has changed. And a number of states have changed. Michigan is now a right-to-work state, and it was a bastion of the UAW in 1970. We see those situations differently. And in Florida, the Democrats had the Senate there, and Claude Red Pepper, out of Jacksonville, Florida, was in the House of Representatives. Earlier than that, he was a senator from Florida. That sort of shows a little bit of the political graphic, how it has changed. And, of course, we had Al Gore's father in the Senate at that time out of Tennessee. So people have changed. And another theory we had here at the Crystal Ball, based upon prosperity, many of these states, Tennessee, for instance, became much more economically viable under Al Gore, etc. And then they started their move to be more conservative. Not only that, race played a very important part in that voting for G.W. Bush over brother John Kerry in that particular election in 2004. And then came Barack Obama, who changed the whole thing. He didn't carry Tennessee, but he did carry Florida, and he did carry Indiana, and he carried North Carolina. So those are states Democrats, in some instances, had not carried since LBJ, quite literally. So that is a different scenario shaping up here. The midterms, looking at local elections, that's what we look at, the local state designated elections is one of the things. Let's see the last sentence here, that Democratic Party has any chance at all of capturing the majority. This is in the Senate. Now, we go past this. We had somewhere here real clear politics up here. We usually do this on the weekend. Wednesday we had more out here. We won't go into Ohio, but in Arizona, very interesting there. McSally is ahead of the other right-wingers, Chemtrail Ward and Joe Arpaio. I think he's at 15%. That's the Republican side. And on the Democratic side, they have these various McSally and then Ward and then Arpaio. And Sinema is 4 up on McSally, 10 up on Chemtrail Ward, 18 up on Joe Arpaio. And in Michigan, the Senate race there, James is 14 points up. Texas governor's race, Wheelchair Abbott is 13 up over Valdez. That's a corner pick poll there. And Mitchell Research out of Michigan, that's a Republican. Anyway. And various job approval ratings at 44. This was on Wednesday at DJ Trump. 43 at the that was at Reuters. 43 at The Economist and YouGov. Generic ballot has at YouGov, Democrats up by 4, up by 6 at Reuters, up by 6 also at Rasmussen. That's interesting. And Gallup, this congressional approval rating is meaningless. At 17 at Gallup and 77 disapprove, but yet most people will be re-elected. So we don't look to that very deeply there. And the Rasmussen poll, who's an outlier, I said liar, at 50% supposedly for DJ Trump. It's always much higher there. Let's do the sports. And incidentally, at Ohio State, Urban Meyer is on the investigation there. We'll have more on that on the week that was. The baseball scores. The Angels were in Florida. Rays Tampa 4-2. The Rockies were in St. Louis. Cardinals 3-2 in that contest. The Royals were on the south side of Chicago. White Sox finally won 6-4. The Mariners were in Philadelphia. Phillies 5-2. Make sure here. Always a little, yeah. Anyway, the Reds and Nationals in D.C. The Nationals finally gave Scherzer a win, 10-7. It's time they win something, I suppose. And the Red Sox had a slugfest in Fenway Park, 15-7 over the Yankees. Mr. Johnson was the winner there. In Atlanta, and the Mets in New York, Atlanta 4-2. The Orioles and Rangers in Texas, the Rangers 17-8. And the Padres and Cubs in Wrigley. The Padres socked it to the Cubs 6-1. Oh boy. Atlanta, and it was in Los Angeles, and the Dodgers drove old Dixie down 21-5. Atlanta had 9 hits, 2 errors, and the Dodgers just kept hitting. They had 18 hits, no errors. The Giants and D-backs in Arizona. Giants finally pulled one out there, 8-1. And Toronto and the Mariners in Seattle. Blue Jays 7-2. That is the sport. And we are done here. The week that was on Saturday morning will come as usual. And we'll have we will have numbers, man. That's our financial report. That will appear this weekend also. And an open source report. Our technical report on open source software and hardware will also appear. And, of course, the Monday morning quarterback, which we always dedicate to the late Jerry Pippen, will appear also. And we do have a production here on the election in Zimbabwe, which was won by Emerson Mnangagwa. Closer than some had said. I think it was 6 points, but people have been killed after the election. We'll talk about that, and we will also play the interview by the former president, Mr. Mugabe, and he brought several issues up. And now it appears to the world that there's no change in military in the street, killing people. So these supposedly millions that were going to open up from the West, they had observers there. Hopefully they'll have some of those observers here in 2018. Anyway, that slanted the election towards him. And you can tell after all the adverse publicity given to Dr. Robert Mugabe. Sorry about that. Anyway, this will do it for us. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on a Saturday morning. Good day. As Paul Harvey.